That's portions of the letter. Well, I answered Carol Lister, who wrote that letter. She's regional director of the ADL, by inviting her to appear on Like It Is to confront Dr. Ben. Well, the ADL has accepted, and so has Dr. Ben. We'll get things right underway in a moment. Professor Yosef ben Jochannan, or Dr. Ben as he is popularly known, is an Egyptologist, the author of innumerable books on African history and Egyptology, and has taught for several years at Cornell University. Rabbi Arthur Seltzer is director of the Long Island Regional Office of the Anti-Defamation League and resides in Great Neck, Long Island. Welcome to Like It Is.
Thank you.
Maybe we can start with you, Rabbi Seltzer. Did you see the program?
No, I did not see the program, but I have studied the transcripts.
Okay. How did you come to this chair today? How did that happen, since you didn't see the program? You were called by the New York office of the ADL and made aware of the program?
Yes, Carol Lister, who originally wrote to you, very much wanted to appear, but because of a conflict of schedule, yes, she asked if I would assume the responsibility of responding in the name of ADL.
All right.
And that's what brings me here.
And she sent you the transcript?
Yes, indeed.
All right. What are your problems with the comments that were made by Dr. Ben in the program?
From the perspective of the ADL, we have numerous difficulties with the statements that were made, and I suspect we'll have an opportunity as the program goes on to discuss specifics. But in an overall general sense, as we study the transcript, Dr. Ben's remarks were full of clearly factual errors, but the kind of errors which were not just matters of detail, but were matters that would lead one down the path of the charge of dual loyalty, which, as Carol Lister indicated in her letter, has been a classic charge of the anti-Semite throughout the generations. The statement that appears in the transcript that was made by Dr. Ben, that a Jewish child makes a statement of allegiance to Israel and makes a statement of allegiance greater than even to his Americanism, is so patently false and outrageous as to make one wonder why such a statement would be made. I must tell you that before joining the staff of the Anti-Defamation League, I served as a congregational pulpit rabbi for 9 years and officiated at countless numbers of bar and bat mitzvahs in my congregations. And I must tell you that never have I heard a more inaccurate statement as to what goes on. The transcript indicates that a Jewish child commits himself that there shall never be another Holocaust, takes upon himself political obligations, takes upon himself the responsibility to fight for the state of Israel. The reality is that in the Jewish tradition, bar mitzvah means a son of the commandments, and a boy becomes a bar mitzvah, a son of the commandments, upon his 13th birthday. A girl, in America, the practice tends to be at 12. According to Talmudic law, she reaches her majority at 12 and a half. The bar mitzvah ceremony most specifically indicates that a Jewish child, a minor, now has reached that stage in life where he is considered an adult Jew in terms of his religious and communal responsibilities. Any statements that are made of commitment by bar and bat mitzvah children or adults as they enter the adult world in the Jewish community are statements of acceptance of the yoke of the commandments, of all that comes with Jewish life, personal, family, communal, and under no circumstances are there statements of political content. But if I could perhaps clarify this a bit more, Dr. Ben then indicated in the transcript, as it appears, that this very statement of loyalty that's made to the state of Israel is the seedbed out of which comes the charge of dual loyalties. And we ask ourselves in the Anti-Defamation League the following question: why would anyone offer such a blatantly false and frankly perverse statement of what it means for a Jewish community to celebrate a religious ceremony of passage The answer, we might suggest, is the next sentence, which indicates the charge of dual loyalties. This statement was made many, many times throughout the entire transcript. It led in one of his remarks to a statement in discussing about Israel that now we understand about the genocide of the Hebrews as they entered the land. The commitment of a Jewish child to fight for Israel reflects the genocidal entrance of the children of Israel into the land in biblical times. Not only does that have a distinctly political ring to it, it is again an unacceptable statement, if only from the point of view of biblical scholarship, which very clearly has come to understand that those sections that speak of a victorious march of an army of onslaught into the land are certainly later sections of the text edited as kind of national poetry. But if one reads the second book of Samuel in the Bible, one reads very clearly a different version of the immigration of tribes slowly into the land, the entrance into the land, the settlement with other peoples. And indeed, a close reading of the text will indicate that even during the times of King David and King Solomon and after, many non-Hebrews lived side by side with the Hebrews in the land. In effect, there was no such genocide. There was no such destruction. And to even raise the thought that a Jewish child indicates his loyalty to the Jewish people in the context of that historical statement, and it's applied in terms of the Jewish present, is something that, frankly, insulting is, I think, an apt word as far as we understand it. If I may just add one other part to this. The transcript would indicate that Dr. Ben, in his concern for the need in the black community for cultural and ideological structures and unity, which is obviously a laudable and praiseworthy goal, then proceeds to redefine Jewish history and biblical history in a way which may be conducive to his political view, but does violence to history. He refers to Judaism as originating in Africa, that all of Judaism comes from Africa. The reality of the biblical text, one must merely open it to read, is that Abraham comes from Mesopotamia. He comes from the area which we today refer to as the Fertile Crescent. Indeed, what we refer today as Judaism, the religion of the Jewish people, reached its full maturity not in Egypt, but according to many scholars, after the first exile in 586 BCE back into Mesopotamia. The need to rewrite history of other people in order to create a cultural superstructure for oneself does neither justice to the one whose history is being rewritten, nor the one who pursues the worthy goal of cultural structures. And therefore, to tie it up, we find most disturbing the factual mistakes that are replete in this transcript, but of more compelling concern, the ultimate dual loyalty, genocidal, militaristic implications of the statement.
Genocidal, you say?
In the reference to the biblical genocide, so it appears in the transcript, that is the term that's used, of the children of Israel as they entered the land. I would certainly not subscribe to such a term. The very fact that it does appear attributed to Dr. Ben in the text, we find to be absolutely, again, insulting and unacceptable.
Right. Dr. Ben, what is your response?
By the way, I have to let the rabbi know I'm much as a Jew as he is. Born of a Jewish mother, a Yemenite grandmother, a Yemenite Puerto Rican mother, Ethiopian Hebrew father, Beta Israel, by the way, they call us Falasha for whatever their reasons. Thus, I am as much a Jew as the rabbi or the grand rabbi in Israel, any of the grand rabbis in Israel. Is the rabbi stating here that in the book of Genesis, there is no mention of the extermination, and I use the word genocide, of the 7 tribes of the Amalekites, the Hittites, the Moabites, the Jebusites. He in his own statement stated that this is ameliorated somewhat in the book of Samuel. Everybody saw that. But the book of Samuel doesn't change the book of Genesis. And we remember that Genesis wasn't written first. It was Exodus. It's at the Council of Jamia that they decided to write Genesis. Next, since there is no Jewish race, you know, you have Indian Jews from India, from Kashim Jews, look like any Indian. You have ourselves from Ethiopia. By the way, the rabbi wouldn't forget that it says Moses married the daughter of the high priest of Ethiopia, or Cush. Being a rabbi, he will know this. Second, moreover, about the bar mitzvah, and I went through one like the rabbi went through one at around the same period of time, is the rabbi saying that the bar mitzvah is not a commitment to the people? Isn't the Torah demanding? And I don't talk about the Talmud. Talmud is not Torah. The Torah is supposed to have been written by God or passed down, although it was in fact written at the Sanhedrin. The theory, the mythology, the allegories that it's written by God or passed down by Moses, again, is a myth. That's Jewish mythology, because Moses is dead in around 1196 before the Christian era, whereas the Sanhedrin doesn't release a thing called the Torah until about 700 before the Christian era, which was written from 700 before the Christian era to 500. It took 200 years. There's a commitment in anybody, that any child that's been bar mitzvah, and when you're talking about circumcision of women, that is strictly Western, and it has nothing to do with orthodoxy. They're using the word orthodoxy to mean something. There's never been a circumcision. It can't be a circumcision of girls. But anyhow, let us continue. The point is that in the bar mitzvah, it commits the boy. Wait, if you commit yourself to the community, there's a call to return to Israel. There's a call that every child, I went through it, that you must come back to Israel. If that isn't a fact, the rabbi can say what he wants. His position of, or the ADL, position of fear of this, then let's look at the behavior. It's just like saying today, you know, one time the rabbi, I don't know personally, but the ADL and all the other Jewish organizations, one time didn't even recognize that we exist as falashas. It is something in America. American Jews have decided that they're going to speak for all Jews. And not only for all Jews, you remember they said blacks and Jews. I'm black and Jewish. You're white and Jewish. You're European. You're of European Jewish ancestry. I'm African Jewish ancestry. No more claim to Israel than I have, because there's no Jewish race. Okay, let me continue. The rabbi he says that Abraham, he points to Judaism coming from Abraham. Then I said that the rabbi obviously have not read the 10 Commandments and their source. Moses is not until about 1346 before the Christian era, 49 years after the death of Amenhotep IV, otherwise known as Akhenaten. Every one of those 12 so-called commandments, and that Moses is supposed to have gotten at Mount Sinai. By the way, Mount Sinai is still in Egypt, in Africa, hasn't gone any place. Now, those 10 commandments weren't gotten by Moses. Because I'm Jewish, don't mean that I have to follow the mythology. When you go in any of the major tombs in Egypt, you find those 10 commandments plus 32 more, otherwise referred to as the negative confession. Am I to believe that Moses was born in Mizraim, Egypt, about 1346 before the Christian era, went to school there, become a priest, at age 85 or around there, decided that somebody mistreated his people, and that in every school in Egypt, you had to recite the negative confession, 42 laws, of which they said, I have not killed man or woman, I have not stolen this, I have not, every one of the so-called 10 commandments is already stated. That Moses didn't see it. I would like the rabbi to tell me, where does it show that Abraham taught any of this? I would like the rabbi to tell me, before circumcision in Egypt, where did the Jews have circumcision? They said that Abraham's circumcision is part of what made him Jewish. Then the rabbi must tell me, the worship of the golden calf, which they call the golden calf, isn't that the worship of Hathor, the goddess Hathor? We could go on down.
Well, before we go on, Dr. Ben, let me just intrude. We do need to take a commercial break. We'll pause for breath, and we'll return right after this. Criticisms, Dr. Ben, that was voiced by Rabbi Seltzer, is that you suggested that there is a political overtone in the ritual bar mitzvah, and he objects to this. Can you substantiate your statement?
Gil, if you went to any bar mitzvah, there's a lecture after the young man and before the young man. There's a lecture of the young man's commitment. It is a lecture in my commitment. Every child, if the rabbi is sitting here and tell me that the rabbi doesn't get up and give a lecture about the bar mitzvah, and the youngster doesn't pick out a section of the Torah to read, and that the youngster doesn't get up there and make a commitment to the Jewish community, then I don't know what form of Judaism. I don't know if he's Reform, Reconstructionist, Conservative, or Orthodox, or whatever else there may be. But it would be rare to me not to go to a bar mitzvah and not hear the rabbi mentioning the commitment to the Jewish people and to Israel. If, in fact, that rabbi is, unless the rabbi is anti-Israel.
Yes, I think there are a number of things that must be made clear, and the level of misstatements in this are also quite clear. You just repeated, as appeared in the transcript, the statement that the bar mitzvah boy picks out his selection for the morning. But it's rather common knowledge and Jewish practice of centuries that there is a set cycle of the reading of the Torah and the Haftorah, and bar mitzvah children under no circumstances are in a position to pick and choose their Torah portions. Their portions are part of the set calendar prescription of which portions of the Torah progressively are to be read on a given Shabbat, a Saturday morning. So that even on this factual level, there's a disturbing lack of accuracy in your presentation.
Wait, European Jews don't run Judaism. You don't make Judaism. Among the Palashas, among the Jews from Kashim Jews, we pick. You see, Judaism is run by you. You don't set the standard for Judaism.
So now we're in the process of a double standard of selection. You have indicated in your transcript that this is what occurs in American synagogues.
It does too.
By indicating that Jewish children make this statement of loyalty to Israel. Yet when I clarify your misstatement about how Torah readings are selected, you tell me, well, there are other practices aside from the practice here, which may indeed be true. One example being the triennial cycle of the reading of the Torah. But then you can't take the American example and then selectively learn from it something that you choose from another context.
The Jewish child doesn't read the entire sermon of the period. He does select a section within that period. That's all I said. The child doesn't read the entire book or the entire thing that is going to be said on that particular Shabbat. The child has a section within it he reads.
And there are indeed many synagogues, especially in the Orthodox community, in which the entire section is indeed the entire parsha.
So then you're admitting that there is divergence between the Jewish synagogue right here in America?
Within the prescripted calendar structure of readings.
All I said is that the child is allowed to pick out. You're saying in the Orthodox, in certain Orthodox, not all, the child must read the entire thing. I'm saying that the child is allowed to pick out a section. What is wrong with that?
According to your transcript, and I won't take the time to find the exact words unless it's required, you make a statement that the child may pick out sections, and you use the term Isaiah or from whatever.
Depending on the period of time in which we are.
Depending if Isaiah is indeed part of the text.
Who said not? I mean, you just brought in other words, I said exactly what you're saying, that the child is allowed to pick out that section. Let's say that we're reading the book of Isaiah now, or we're reading the book of Hosea. The child is allowed to pick out of Isaiah a certain section, or the child is allowed in Hosea if we are reading at that particular time, because all the children don't make bar mitzvah in the same month and at the same time.
One should be clear, however, that that's partially accurate, because part liturgically of what a child is expected to read or participate in, if possible, is the reading from the Torah itself. Indeed, the reading from the Haftorah is a significantly later development, precisely because if a child is a bar mitzvah, is a son of the commandments, then one of his first public possible acts is being called up to the public reading of the Torah.
Right.
And it's by this act that his reaching adulthood is publicly declared. If I may, however, go on to what I think.
Wait, let's settle this before we move on, and then I'll be happy to let you...
because there were some other points that I think should be
we're going to try to get into all of that. Your response, Dr. Ben?
The point is, everyone I stated is adulthood. The question is not when does he do this. if he's a man or a child, because assume, I already stated, the Torah would be similar in essence to the confirmation of the Christians. When the child comes of a certain age and take up his manhood, in order to be able to sit in the minyan, to sit in the official congregation as a young man, he has to come and go for the bar mitzvah before he could sit in the minyan. You know.
Okay.
Now, he doesn't deny that. All I'm saying, and which he can't refute, he's saying about later changes. I don't care what the changes, if it's later or earlier. The fact is that they do it.
There's a very curious kind of contextual oversimplification here. On the one hand, Dr. Ben correctly points out certain instances of Egyptian historical input in what we today call the religion of the Hebrews and later Judaism. And no one can deny the role of cultural and historical context. On the other hand, given it would seem your political need to view all through the African perspective, you completely ignore the experience of the Code of Hammurabi, of the Mesopotamian sources of law, which appear significantly modified in later Torah development. What I'm suggesting is that, on the one hand, it is a strange scholarly position to argue that historical context must be accounted for in the development of Judaism, which I would accept, and then argue, however, that only that political context which is useful to your present political view is to be noted and is acceptable. As I read the transcript, as I read the transcript here, there is a comment here that says, and permit me to paraphrase loosely, that Judaism and all of Judaism and the Jewish people come from Egypt, therefore they are African, and therefore there is a statement later on that many blacks do not understand that they are indeed Jews. Now that raises to us a very curious question: why the constant need to inject a racial quota into a diverse historical context, which we would acknowledge, but yet on the other hand, as we sit here having watched Operation Moses and the ingathering of Ethiopian Jews into Israel, why then the need to define by race as what is essentially authentic in Judaism strikes us as a contradiction that at least can possibly be interpreted in terms of current political context, but certainly not by history.
All right. I'm glad that you brought that last point, so I work from the last forward or backwards. Isn't it strange that just yesterday that the Jews in America found out that they are black Jews? Isn't it strange also that you don't consider us Jews, because when we go to Israel, you're still demanding that we must, quote unquote, reconvert. Who said we converted in the first place? Who said, what right have European Jews, who don't belong there either, have a right to tell us and to carry us through a shameful...
I'm sorry, European Jews who what?
No,
who don't have a...
No, any more than we do. Okay. Because the Russian Jews come there, many of them not circumcised, many of them never have a bar mitzvah, and we had to, nobody asked them to reconvert. We had to go there, and a farce called circumcision, and the, you know, I wanted to use the Hebrew word, but at the moment. And we're supposed to go through all that. Next thing, Rabbi, how come my uncle, Tamarat Emmanuel, came here in 1935 to raise money when Italy invaded Ethiopia? We were 5 million. When we left, we were 50,000. The Jewish community in America refused, denied that we existed. Up to now in Israel, you have 2 Grand Rabbi at least. The Sephardic Grand Rabbi and the Ashkenazi Grand Rabbi, the European Grand Rabbi, that refused to recognize that we're even Jews. Only the Sephardic Grand Rabbi started with Obadiah Yosef when he was the chief rabbi. Now let's go back. So that it's a farce about Israel telling us to come there for whatever the reason. In that, Israel to this day, from 1947, have in the Knesset a petition for the acceptance of Jews from Ethiopia, the right to return. To this day, it has not been approved. It is still being tabled every year. Now, so that you try to show the liberality of white American Jews when it doesn't exist. It doesn't exist at all. Because if you're saying that you're bringing us back, then we should go back as Jews, not as something that you're going to make us over there. Who gives you the authority to say who is a Jew and who isn't a Jew? You talk about my desire for the political aristocracy, my political sense. Well, it was obvious that no one questions European Jews. Am I to believe that European Jews don't have a white politics here? When blacks move into a Jewish neighborhood, white Jewish neighborhood, doesn't the white Jew move like the white Christian? I mean, doesn't the white Jew have white flight to the suburb? Now, so as a Jew, are you saying that I should behave as a Jew, period, in the United States, that means white Jew, in the United States, and run from the blacks? And when I come here, my acceptance in Judaism isn't the same as when you come. When you come, if you came as a white Jew, and the white Jews, and you deal with whites. Now, I'm a black Jew, isolated from Judaism by virtue of that, because of my blackness. When I go into a synagogue, most synagogue I go into, the first thing they tell me, and I say I'm Jew, when you become Jew, did your parents convert? When? You don't ask a white person walk into the synagogue and say that. Go back about the Jews learning the Hammurabi Code. When you talk about Hammurabi Code, you're talking about 2000 BC, just the other day, historically speaking. The concept of one God didn't come from Moses nor Hammurabi. Akhenaten preached one God before Moses was born. The Aaron and about their being African. If you're born in America, you are an American Jew, wouldn't you say? Now, where was Aaron born? Where was Moses born? And Sarah, Aaron's sister, and all of them, Miriam. Where were all of this supposed to be happening? Before the Jews come in contact again as a group. Not Moses, not Abraham alone and his little family. From Abraham and excluding Joseph. From then on, according to Torah, for approximately 400 years, everything the Jews learned was in Egypt. Everything. Because from the time of Joseph, Genesis ends, and Moses died. And there came a time when Joseph died. Because of this bad Pharaoh that came, who knew not Joseph. From then on, we had to hear about the plight of the Jewish people and so forth. But before that, from the time of Potiphar, all the way down to the Exodus, isn't it everything the Jew learned was in there? It was no Hammurabi Code. And I says the basic foundation of Judaism, one God and all that, came out of Africa. Egypt is still there, not in the Middle East.
Time for another break. We will continue with our discussion, our modest discussion, right after this. Let's press on.
Let's, please. A number of points. Again, we're into this historical selectivity, and at the risk of sounding as if I'm pushing Mesopotamia today, the reality is, of course, that both the archaeological and the literary evidence of such areas as Ebla and others clearly illustrate that a proto-monotheism existed in the Mesopotamian area centuries and centuries before the Hebrews. Some scholars have even attempted to identify one of the Mesopotamian names of this god as Eloah, and in that way tried to learn from it the Hebrew term Elohim. And I merely identify this as one scholarly view. Again, I wouldn't want to deny for a moment that Egypt was part of the cultural mix, and therefore Africa, as you would want to make the political point. But to selectively ignore all other historical factors to then be able to make a political point is not to be dismissed as a cry of anti-Semitism when it's raised, but is to be called for inaccuracy in the historical record. And one has an absolute right to do that when that inaccuracy then feeds it to contemporary politics. But if I would if I could respond to the Ethiopian issue.
No, wait, no, I got to answer you that point first. Then you could go to the Ethiopian issue, because that's a big issue too. Mm-hmm. You try to throw over that anti-Semitism slipping right there. Mm-hmm. Even when a Jew disagrees with a Jew, it becomes anti-Semitic. By the way, I hope that you would agree that the common statement in America among Jews is that if your mother is Jewish, then you're Jewish. Would you agree to that?
According to Jewish law,
okay. And if I make it better, if your father is Jewish and your mother Jewish, then you're ultra Jewish.
Excuse me, one's father has nothing to do with the status of
I
Jewish
added
law.
That for extra measure.
Right, but that has no
I didn't say it does. I didn't say it
status.
does. Don't be peculiar. I mean, we're dealing with the issue. I said, well, okay, my mother is, and so that makes me yes. That makes me.
That. Yes.
Okay, fine. So then to call me anti-Semitic as a Jew practicing, went through all the rituals like the lady who probably did on yourself, then it would mean that I strongly disagree with the teachings that what you just stated, for example. Then I said to you, using the Torah itself, on the statement of the Torah that Abraham came from the city of Ur in the nation of Chaldea, which was at the time, since we're using by history, ruled by Africans, a joint army that went all the way to India. Now you said scholars. There's only one scholar that made that remark that I know of, and that's the one from the Stern Institute over there in Lexington Avenue. Now, secondly, there may be continuation of those scholars coming out of European context. What you fail to understand, Rabbi, is that European Jews are Europeans and think as Europeans and act as Europeans. African Jews, on the other hand, are being asked not to act as Africans and an African Jewish scholar, African scholarship. And thus you're telling me with the scholars. Now let me go.
All right, are you finished addressing his
No, the
point?
last part of
you
his
got more?
point.
All right.
Last part of his point. The period of time in which we're speaking, and unfortunately Torah doesn't give dates, but the period of time in which we're talking about Avram or Abraham isn't born until around 1775 BCE, before the Christian era. That would put him around the 13th century, 13th dynasty, Egyptian 13th dynasty, Ethiopian 13th, the dynasty of the Nile Valley as a whole, because it's not only Egypt. Egypt is the zenith of a culture that goes way back, because the ancient Egyptians themselves said, we came from the beginning of the Nile where God happy dwell. All of those things. For instance, look at Rabbi, the myth that the Jews built the pyramids. You know that's a myth. Yet it's taught, probably you say it yourself, Koch gets up there and he goes and stands up on the pyramid, Begin gets it up there, and you know pretty well that the last pyramid was built before the birth of the first Jew, Abraham. Now, if I say that, I'll be anti-Semitic.
All right. In the interest of fairness, Dr. Ben, let's hear what Rabbi Seltzer has to say.
What's disturbing is simply the level of misunderstanding of what we're saying is that the scholarly view that I identified and which you then identified as a Stern College view. Stern College is part of Yeshiva University, right, an Orthodox institution. My background is in the Reform movement. I assure you that much of what I've suggested in terms of biblical scholarship would be totally rejected and considered unacceptable by the Orthodox community. I know that. As representing non-rabbinic analysis of Torah. Therefore, to dismiss my remarks as being represented by Stern College raises the question of what kind of comprehension we have here of scholarship and indeed the pluralism within the Jewish community. And that leads me to the point I want to make.
Good point.
In the transcripts and in your remarks now, there's a tendency to speak of all Jews in the broadest context, so that you began with the Ethiopian issue by speaking about Israelis, then switched to white American Jews, and as I listened to you, I heard a constant tendency to put everything in the category of white, European versus black, Sephardic, Oriental. And again, I ask myself...
That's the way it is.
And again, I ask myself the question, the state of Israel, which has a population today which is 60% Sephardic, right, non-European...
Who are at the bottom of the social ladder.
Excuse, please, I listen to you. Which a population which is 60% non-European, a population coming from the Middle East and the Oriental countries, it is certainly a political charge, which we hear constantly and is used constantly, that Israel is a white European colonialist bastion in the middle of an Arab third world part of the world. But the reality is that Israel today increasingly takes on the Levantine quality of the area in which it's in, precisely because of the population. side point, but let me proceed.
But let me point and don't want me to answer
let
it.
Me
and
proceed,
no, let me answer that and then you
no,
proceed.
Sir,
no, wait, now you don't run the program.
Can
I answer
please?
him?
No.
Let me interject. Let me interject. Let me give you 1 minute to press your point forward, and then Dr. Ben can... I must say that the time is evaporating.
Fine.
And that is my concern.
So then it's necessary to proceed.
1 minute.
Well, I shall try it 1 minute. Again, this attempt to say that only black Jews experience difficulty in Israel. There are a number of, frankly, inaccuracies in this. When Soviet Jews began to come to Israel, there was precisely the same kind of questioning raised by the rabbinate. Since the rabbinic establishment and authorities were in disarray in the Soviet Union, were indeed these people who were coming Jews under Orthodox law. It caused political problems. Ultimately, it was worked out as the issue with the Ethiopians is a problem, will be worked out. To characterize this on a racial basis is totally unworthy of what is indeed going on today in Israel.
Dr. Ben?
He speaks of the multiracial characteristic of Israel, but he didn't say that the multiracial characteristic isn't visible in the control in Israel. Israel is controlled by a European American, and British factor of white Judaism. He doesn't want me to deal with this reality. I've been there umpteen times.
Is that
I've
true,
seen it
Rabbi
for myself.
I would give you two quick answers to that. That historically, yes, because of the nature of the earlier immigration.
Present day.
At this point in time, given the past election results in which Likud, which was heavily representative of the Sephardic community, and Labour, which has its base in the European community, ended up in essential parity. The reality is that power is increasingly shifting from total European control to indeed what is considered a parity between the two communities.
Well, it would seem to be a simple question, Rabbi Seltzer. Do Jews who are European or white control Israel, or do Jews who are African control Israel?
No, it's not that simple, because we're dealing with, no, not at all, because we're dealing with the question of process. And the question of process simply indicates that the initial migration of population out of which the state of Israel was established was European. The governmental structures were created by these people. Immediately after the creation of the state, over 500,000 Sephardic Jews from the Middle East, from North Africa, were brought into the state while it was involved in a fight for independence. These people took the obvious number of years to be able to function effectively on all levels of government, in all levels of Israeli society. Time is a necessary factor in life, but as of this point today, one can say without any hesitation that the non-European Sephardic community wields tremendous power in the state of Israel today.
Who is the dominant power?
And is on. Who is a dominant power? Again, I would indicate that by the last election, in which both Likud and Labour ended up in what is essentially a dead heat, one can learn from this that there is no one group in power anymore.
Dr. Ben?
The rabbi is saying to me that if I went to Israel or you went to Israel, that most of the people in government, the ambassadors traveling all over, are not European American and British Jews. Am I to believe that that's what he's saying, that there's an equal division of power? I can't think that the rabbi will stay there and say this and give this kind of a evasive answer to the question. The European and European American and British Jews still dominate the politics of Israel, still dominate the economy of Israel. And is he saying to me that these people are now welcome? My point to him is, regardless of what rabbis may have said, did they demand that the Jews from Russia go through a new halakha? Do they reconversion? Do they demand a brisk, a brisk circumcision?
Such were the demands. Such were exactly the demands.
Was it carried through?
And just as, and the parallel is a very important one, just as politically the intent of the Orthodox, let me finish please, just as politically the intent of the Orthodox rabbinic establishment could not be considered acceptable, and these demands were ultimately dropped with Soviet Jews, so one finds that as the Ethiopian Jewish community grows, the rabbinate itself has been forced to back down, and I think it is a very clear statement that most Israeli opinion would accept.
We're out of time for this segment.
That is not true, because up to now...
Wait a minute now. I got a cut for a commercial break. All right. I know you're hot, both hot. It's a hot program. Hey, this is the last segment you can't run over, and I'm going to chop you if you do. We can't resolve your philosophical, your political, your historical, your ideological differences clearly this hour. But maybe we can address ourselves to tone and intent. Obviously, the letter that was written by the ADL objects to the tone and suggests that there may be some premeditated, sinister, injurious intent to Dr. Ben's remark for political reasons. And perhaps you can clarify that, and perhaps Dr. Ben can rebut and answer, and maybe perhaps we can clarify and heal this rift.
As we read the transcript, and as we discussed today, we see much in your remarks that is reflected in third world political statements in the UN, in other forums. The fact that you are indeed Jewish in no way changes the content of these remarks and the political context in which we see them. From our point of view, as Ethiopians were starving and are starving, Israel was the only country that offered the kind of aid to physically bring black Ethiopians out. And indeed, it's the only example of a nation of Caucasians, to use the term that appears frequently here, of bringing in whites, bringing blacks in dignity as citizens. To begin to turn it around says to us, we begin to hear the same kind of third world, radical, political kind of rhetoric, which is directed towards the United Nations, towards Israel and the United Nations, which we hear in so many other forums. This is what we respond to, this willingness to identify Jews and Judaism with colonialism, whites, repression, and having read some of your other material in addition to this, I must say that it's a theme that strikes me as pervasive and something that we find unacceptable in a public forum.
All right.
Number one, you spoke very much about generalized statement. You just said that the Ethiopians are starving and you're bringing out. Isn't it a fact that you're talking about only, Ethiopia has about 40 million people. You're talking about 5 miles from the border with Sudan in south, where the starvation situation developed. Isn't it also a fact that the Palestinians, the Ethiopians with better Israel, our people were not particularly at that spot? Isn't it a fact that the same United Nations you call on found that many of our community was ready to bring people out? And you talk about the only nation to help. Isn't it also a fact that there are almost every nation in the world in Ethiopia giving assistance to people who are hungry on the northern borders of Ethiopia?
Are you suggesting that it would have been better for Israel to, in no sense, save black lives? Is this what you're suggesting?
Wait, now, you talk about this. No. If Israel had bring them, I was saving us for the reason that you indicated, or tried to indicate, yes. Well, how is it that all of a sudden that we are saved, but we wind up in the army, and we die from starvation? We wind up in people's house cleaning, and you know, Falasha women, Falasha never let their women, this is one thing against our principle, to work as domestic in anybody's house. We're doing that now. Why didn't you mention the 4 Falashas last 3 weeks ago that committed suicide over this in Israel? Why didn't you mention the protest meeting in Israel? Why didn't you mention the dialogue between Israel and Ethiopia, that the Falashas mean that they want to go back to Ethiopia, and there's a dialogue about, and the Ethiopian government say, you took them, bring them back?
So the saving of lives by the state of Israel of Jews is another example of racism, according to you.
If you could say it that way, okay. But if you get cheap labor, you don't have to worry about the lives.
And that is the purpose at which the state of Israel brought the Ethiopian community for cheap labor. That is unworthy of a public statement.
Okay, it is. But when we were dying from Mussolini extermination, it is typical of the behavior of European American Jews. You don't want me to say that. Rabbi, you probably live in a racist society yourself. I couldn't probably walk any night. You don't want me to
Had
deal
Israel
with
not
Israel.
initiated the Operation Moses, I suspect you
They
would have
would
been
not-
among the first who would have said, you see how racist the
Not
state
me,
of Israel
not
is
me. I think
for
the
not
biggest
responding to the plight of
It's the
Jews
biggest
even though
mistake.
they're black.
It's the biggest mistake,
But now
Rabbi,
you say that
Rabbi,
even though
you
they're
ask for the
black, it's a
decency, you
racist
ask for the
response.
courtesy of listening.
It's outrageous.
I listened to you.
It's absolutely
but you don't think that I
outrageous.
feel that you're outrageous? Now, my point is this, that a nation that said we don't exist, you know, with the contrition of Israel, the thousands upon thousands of Israelis leaving Israel constantly, you need to replenish that community. You have an Arab situation, and don't deal with me about third world, because I'm not a member of the third world, I'm a member of the first world. You know, Gingivitis boys was long before Adam and Eve, and it's found in Africa. Lucy is found in Ethiopia, and it's 3.2 million years. You see, you want me to go along with a dialogue that suits you as a European Jew, but doesn't suit me as an African Jew. And you assume that my African Jewishness should supersede my Africanness. No way, Rabbi, because you want it both ways. You want to be a European Jew, benefiting from being a European, benefiting from being a Jew, and that I sat by and listened to it, and then call it anti-Semitic.
You may have difficulty, but the record will show that I sit here as an American Jew.
That's right.
And that will be my
And I sit
definition.
here as an African
How
Jew.
you choose to define me in whatever racial or political terms you have the need is your business.
Bye.
But I reject
It's over.
it totally.
I got to cut you. I thank you both
Thank you.
for expressing your opinions so openly.